Hello, and thank you so much for taking the time out to listen. Today, I titled this message, When the Enemy Induces the Symptoms of the Disorder. When the enemy induces the symptoms of the disorder. Today, we are going to talk about a number of things that individuals as well as groups do to keep people mentally, physically, and spiritually enslaved. When I looked up the word induce, I noticed that there were 4 definitions. But the one definition that I'm going to be centering your attention on is to bring about or give rise to. When a person induces something within or around you, they are bringing about your reaction or your response. They're going to see how you deal with that issue. Whether or not you're going to get up and do something about it. The enemy will induce a response or a reaction in such a way that will bring about whatever he so desires or she so desires. Dark energies, things that you cannot see, but you feel some kind of way, are induced by witches and warlocks. When a politician wants you to do something, or maybe not do something, certain things are triggered to bring about a response or lack thereof. When there is that controlling relative who doesn't like you for any number of reasons, he or she may do some things to keep you at bay. Okay? This bringing about or giving rise to is what individuals as well as groups have done for a long time. And I'm going to use the African American community as an example. They have done some things systematically for centuries to keep African Americans in a box, especially those smart ones. Inducing something such as a party, for instance. Someone invites you to a party. And at that party, there's drugs and there's alcohol. And there's all sorts of things that we can't speak on happening at a party. If the individual doesn't care too much about you, they're going to let you do whatever at that party. What do drugs and alcohol do? They induce, they bring about, they bring on strange things. They cause you to lower your inhibition so that you can do some things that your own mother would be ashamed about. How dare my son, my daughter got a lot of nerve. Now, I'm giving you just simple examples to set up what the enemy is doing in terms of using disorders. The symptoms of the disorder or many disorders that one might have to have his way or her way. I've talked about jealousy on this channel. I've talked about the abusive individuals emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually. We turn narcissism up, down, and sideways in terms of discussing that. I even mentioned in audios about various disorders such as histrionic, personality disorder, bipolar disorder. I talked about PTSD. Today I'm coming back to PTSD as an example of how individuals will take a disorder that has been diagnosed. People may even be taking medication, and they'll use that disorder or many disorders to get desired results. Celebrities, entertainers, right? And even some of your own relatives who are very intelligent, have high acuity. These individuals are threats to establishments across the land. Once they know who they are in terms of how far they can go to promote all sorts of change, this is when there are those individuals who are familiar with their mental health conditions. They're going to use their symptoms, their diagnosis, against them. The very personality disorder that is being treated, or for some individuals, they've been healed from, it is stirred up when people become threats to what various establishments are trying to put together. Post-traumatic stress disorder, according to MayoClinic.org, also known as PTSD, is a mental health condition that's triggered by a terrifying event, either experiencing it or witnessing it. Symptoms may include flashbacks, nightmares, and severe anxiety, as well as uncontrollable thoughts about the event. Most people who go through traumatic events may have temporary difficulty adjusting and coping, but with time and good self-care, they usually get better. Now stay with me. They usually get better. Notice, but with time and good self-care, they usually get better. If the symptoms get worse, last for months or even years, and interfere with your day-to-day functioning, you may have PTSD. We are all too familiar with how personality disorders can rob people of their normalcy, their routine, what they hope to accomplish in their lives. But when you have a team of support around you, you do better, right? Some of you all know this. You are making sure that you're taking your medicines, or you're seeing your counselor, or you're doing your breathing exercises, or you're doing your physical exercise. You're getting around individuals who can pray for you. You may be reading books about subjects and gleaning information in order to bring about change, healing. The enemy doesn't want, or enemies, I should say, doesn't want healing. doesn't want you to figure out how to cope. Instead, the enemy has been systematically doing a number of things for quite some time to stir up the weaknesses within men, women, children, not strengthen you. We see this sort of thing every single February with Black History Month. Some folks right away, what do you mean? Well, you see, there's programming that takes place. It's not the type of programming that promotes good self-care and wants you to get better. No. How am I going to get better or govern my self-care if I've got some personality issues that date way back before I was even thought about, much less born? Stay with me. There are those who have good intentions. They will bring about the types of stories and experiences, the headway around the month of February that African Americans have achieved. And so too will these individuals bring about positive things that other ethnicities have done around their celebratory events and so forth, right? But something that many a speaker, prophet, prophetess I've seen in the spirit is this promoting positivity, encouraging people to be better, is also wrapped up into some type of conversations and visuals and insults and put downs and whatever else that people come up with to tear down or break down the very individuals that they claim they're trying to help. And as I said, when you are that one that has a high acuity and you're looking to step out of your comfort zone, out of your specialty, out of what you're used to, you become a threat to various establishments, civic groups, fraternal, as well as sorority organizations. These groups are very controlling. They're like the physically abusive man or woman who is just angry, going all in on you to do what? To get you to stand down, to back away, to crawl over there in your corner and be quiet, to get you to be so visibly nervous, crying your eyes out that you're no longer useful. Stay with me. You're no longer useful. You see, when you start to see that things are not happening, that someone was doing their share of future faking, you're going to rise up. But before you do that, or before you become a threat, let's hear this person, what's bothering them. Let's behave as if we're going to do some things and may even actually help the person out for a time, but then turn right around, find their weakness, use their weaknesses, in this case personality disorders, or stir up their personality disorders to cause them to be immobile. Issues are no longer dealt with, discussions are forgot about, promises are not kept, And some of you all know the rest. Because whenever you had a challenging situation in your life, or even a tragedy, you did not have the mental capacity to handle anything that you had started. And if you did have some capacity left after experiencing so much, you didn't do such a good job as you did prior to being triggered, to having the negativity show up in your life. What would happen if many individuals are triggered, that their weaknesses are used against them, that someone or group systematically stirs up some things just when people are awakening, just when people are at an apex of anger and upset? We saw examples of this sort of thing when people were very upset with what happened to George Floyd. And we saw this sort of thing when people were getting out there talking about they wanted to reopen the economy. And we saw this sort of thing when people started noticing that COVID wasn't going anywhere. You see, people get angry, they get frustrated, they get mean. Their personal issues on the inside that they have been covering up really well start to show up. I remember telling the kids some months back, I said, people are getting meaner out there. We're seeing meanness in areas where we don't typically see meanness even. You know, I mean, you would think that you would be safe fellowshipping with your fellow brothers and sisters until somebody says something stupid or ignores you, acts like they don't see you. Before COVID and I was attending churches, I realized, I said, you know, there's a meanness in the church. Why is there such a meanness? Because of the club mentality. This is our club. You're a newcomer. We don't want you. And if you don't look like us, it's going to be hard to deal with your kind, because I don't really know what your kind is going to do if you show up in here, because from what I saw in media, you guys can act pretty bad. You see? Well, it's going to end up being a whole lot of things in these coming months going into the new year. There's going to be a whole lot of things happening. And when people start turning on television screens and looking at cell phones and iPads and you name it, they're going to be triggered. Unseen spiritual forces at work. Bible has been warning us of these times. We thought that things were bad some years back with earthquakes and tsunamis, fires. We haven't seen anything yet. And when more challenges on top of more challenges happen, this is when symptoms increase or will show back up again in people who don't have any type of spiritual compass. I looked at an article, and the article talked about how the church was an integral part of the African American experience that they, have gone through, and all of, the things surrounding slavery, that the church has been there. the people of God has been there. As African Americans, those of you all who understand where I'm coming from, it was the praying grandmother. It was you yourself praying. It was that person that the community may have deemed as a little bit touched out there, but yet he knew Jesus. What do you think is going to happen when so many who don't know Jesus, who don't have a spiritual compass, who said that is that religion stuff or spiritual stuff, that's for ignorant people? What do you think is going to happen when everything hits the fan and that all their unresolved issues start to bubble to the surface and increase the suicides? That's what's going to happen. As well as individuals murdering other people, because the pent-up rage is going to come out. You also got ticking time bomb individuals who aren't healed, having served in the military and are now out. Something triggers, and now the ticking time bomb is going to explode. I'm telling you what is ahead. It doesn't sound like the way some of the scriptures would read coming from the major and minor prophets, but it is prophecy. The enemy stirs up the symptoms of various disorders through traumatic events, and people lose their minds. That's the summary of this message. But to go deep, using once again PTSD as an example, what would be some of those symptoms? And you can go down the list, because I'm also going to bring up the narcissistic personality disorder, since that is most popular. And yes, there were so many events that took place over decades that caused us to arrive at this point where every time you turn around, somebody's talking about narcissism. But there are also those individuals who are still talking about PTSD and other disorders as well. But these two right here, these are continuing to be stirred up and are going to reach an apex with those individuals who simply don't have a moral or ethical type of compass. You hear what I'm saying? And you, believer, are going to have to be very discerning, paying close attention to the Lord like never before, because he's going to speak. And anybody who is God's child is going to hear. We're going to all be on the same wavelength. Some of us were already linking up. You feel me, I feel you. Some individuals, that's why I asked that question about dreams, because we're going to pay closer attention to our dreams. That is another way that God is going to reach us, not just through audios and, videos and listening to radio broadcasts or podcasts. There is going to be a distinct word, a word of knowledge that comes from the one true God. And when you piece all of the word of knowledge, statements, phrase, a single word together between all of us, is going to form information that we'll be able to use to get through even tougher times ahead. That's why we need to be talking to each other, whether you're talking to me via comments, you're sending me email, okay? But it is important. It is very important, because we don't want people losing their lives prematurely because they went down the left-hand path thinking that the left-hand path, making a deal with Satan, was what was going to get the job done. And we know better. Satan, whenever he has used a person for a time, That's when he pulls out their old demons. He starts triggering all sorts of things within them because he's the one who used his minions to program some of these entertainers and celebrities in the first place. And he uses them for a time, and then he puts them back in a box. Sink. Go deep. Bye, Alice. Back down the rabbit hole you go with Mr. Rabbit. I can't make this up. I'm feeling things in the spiritual realm. And some of you are like, uh-oh, wait a minute. Yeah, because if you study some of the occultic types of things, as well as the hypnotic and programming that goes on with some of these people who are considered A-listers, you know that once they're used for a time, they're told to go back to their original programming after they've broken them down, because they don't want them to continue to use their high IQ or high acuities that were programmed within them, or they pulled out their so-called genius. They don't want them to continue in that space, because then at some point they know that if the natural and the spiritual align, those individuals are going to want to reach out and pull people out of the bondage, just like what I've been doing for years. The oppression, the suppression, right? Pulling people out of mental, physical, spiritual, sexual abuses and so forth. They don't want that. So Alice goes back down the rabbit hole with Mr. Rabbit, and she never finds her way back home. So, post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. What is some of this stuff going to look like? Going back to Mayo Clinic. Post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms may start within 1 month of a traumatic event. So, a traumatic event or multiple traumatic events that the world hasn't seen in a long time or has yet to see occur. And this is internationally as well as nationally. Reading on, but sometimes symptoms may not appear until years after the event. So, when folks saw 9/11, there were those who were impacted right away. When I saw it live, I went to sleep, because I seen the unedited versions at the time when it was happening, and I thought I was watching a movie. And then when the second plane hit, I realized it wasn't a movie, it was really occurring. And something in my brain shut down, and next thing I know, 2 children that were in diapers were left alone for a number of hours while I slept in the next room. It was nothing but God that took care of those children. It was daylight when I saw what took place on television. By the time I awakened, it was 7 o'clock at night. And the kids were smiling and laughing and having a good old time when I woke up. And one of them was in the high chair. That was the last place I recall he was in. And by the time I woke up, he was asleep in the high chair. The other one was running around the house, getting into things. What happened during the span of seeing that live and going to sleep? To this day, I don't know. Other than Jesus was taking care of those babies. So, when you have nations in uproar for any number of things, this is when those plans are put in motion to put people in boxes to go to sleep. What you see is in what you see. What you hear is in what you hear. I'm going on with reading. These symptoms cause significant problems in social or work situations, and in relationships, they can also interfere with your ability to go about your normal daily tasks. If someone is traumatized by an event and they can't connect the dots, they don't know what happened, they have lost their bearings, if you will, emotionally, physically, spiritually. Their partner isn't a psychologist or psychiatrist. They don't have a clue what's going on. There eventually is a problem in the relationship. And around that time, as things became more and more troubling, and there was more coverage of the event on all sorts of stations and so forth, there was also relationship breakdown. I was more irritable, easily upset, a bit nervous. The person who I was married to, former military sergeant, so you can only imagine what his days were like. And then in time, we just couldn't talk to each other. Okay? They know what they're doing when these manufactured events take place. They being those that think they're helping situations, political leaders and government officials and presidents and rulers and, psychologists, top level ones, psychiatrists, top level ones, doctors, top level ones. Those sorts of individuals know exactly what they're doing when they sit at round tables or long tables in boardrooms discussing how can we manage this public who's out of control. And then the scientists in those rooms will suggest some things to put people back in boxes mentally. And of course, that comes with its share of side effects, like an increase of divorce, more children being abused, wives and husbands abusing one another, more drug addicts and more alcohol addicts. And when people are out of their minds, they do the unthinkable. So you got to think twice about when you go out. Pay attention to your surroundings. Protect yourself. Don't be so quick to open up your front door. Talk to people through windows or through those video doorbells. I'm just giving people some warning. I'm not trying to create or stir up any type of paranoia, but sometimes people get lax, you see, because there's more sun out, or they, depending on what region they live in, or they get lax because people are feeling good and looking good and they're not wearing their masks, and, they get lax because folks are sending children off to school, and, their world seems like there's a bit of normalcy on the surface until the trauma shows up, the traumatic events, and all the symptoms associated with it. We are headed in a direction where more things, once again, are going to take place. And this is why you need God like never before. If you were playing on two sides of the fence, if you weren't convinced in all of these audios that God is real, that God wants to hear from you, well, when these troubling times come, you may be one of those who just fall by the wayside. You go out of your mind. I don't want that for some people, but some people take God simply too lightly, and they take the people of God who preach and teach too lightly. And so, for some individuals, they're continuing to be in sin. They're ignoring what the enemy is doing to their minds. And so God says, okay, if this is what you want, I'm going to let you have the depraved mind. I talked about this in the Python Spirit video. And many of them, that is where they are right now, without being triggered by a traumatic event. They already have depraved minds, debased minds. There is no talking to them about God. Some of you all, as witnesses for the one true God, speaking about Jesus, you saw the way their faces looked. They don't want to hear anything of light, of love, positivity. They don't want to hear it because God let their minds go debased a long time ago. And over time, they're going to be destroyed. And these traumatic events that rise up might be the very things that destroy them mentally first before killing the body. Because some people are in poor health anyway. So the enemy's like, I don't have to do too much work with this one. Send the virus and he's gone. PTSD symptoms are generally grouped into 4 types. There's the intrusive memories, the avoidance, negative changes in thinking and mood, and changes in physical and emotional reactions. Symptoms can vary over time or vary from person to person. Now, when I mentioned earlier about February and African American History Month, it's one thing when, once again, the positive memories, good things that build people up, show up in media. But it's quite another thing that year after year after year, there are images of people being abused showing up on screens. Why is this sort of thing acceptable? Year after year after year. If your mother was murdered and the video was caught, or the situation was caught on video, the event, the act, and you were told to watch it year after year after year, what do you think that's going to do to you? It's going to create post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. What do you think has been going on ever since TV was invented and negative things were being recorded? People were watching. I personally witnessed a person who grew up during that time when it was Jim Crow South, the reactions on this man's face year after year when those images came across screens. You keep doing that to people, you break them down. And these individuals behind all of this, celebrating anniversaries, history, showing us the dark, the disturbing, the ugly, it does what? Once again, triggers symptoms. Individuals will say things like, you got everything, I don't understand. You should be grateful. You want to talk about racism and all this other stuff, right? And there are those individuals living quite comfortably, doing very well in their lives. Haven't really been impacted much by racism. It's still there though, just because they haven't been impacted much and they're living quite good, better than most people, doesn't mean that racism doesn't exist. But what happens when you continue to program a populace to see people who may or may not be related to them in old black and white images being abused and used, mistreated? There is one who ends up becoming his or her worst enemy. I want to do better. I want to strive, but there's something in my programming that's keeping me from achieving. There is something to being in an atmosphere where folks are angry and tense all the time and you don't understand what's going on. And then when they tell you, I grew up in Jim Crow South, and they're talking to you and telling you why you shouldn't trust those people. And meanwhile, you're not realizing, at least when you're young, that what they're saying is nothing more than their programming to keep you from achieving. They're programming to keep you in a box while they're saying, I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to, I'm trying to cause you to be better than, what we were growing up. But then at the same time, belittling you and breaking you down and abusing you. You see how twisted this thing can be? And this is what has been happening. And this is what's going to continue to happen. Those who are programming others, on one hand saying that I want you to be all things great and wonderful and live your best. But then on the other hand, turning around and talking about how you're not good and you'll never be good. And, whatever else they come up with, while using visuals to reinforce these sorts of things. PTSD symptoms are generally grouped into 4 types: intrusive memories, avoidance, negative changes in thinking and mood, and changes in physical and emotional reactions. Symptoms can vary over time or vary from person to person. So the way you see something may not impact you because you just don't have a connection to it. But somebody who has some type of connection to that same event are going to respond differently. Intrusive memories. Symptoms of intrusive memories may include recurrent, unwanted, distressing memories of the traumatic event. What does playing old footage do to prep us for traumatic events to come? Stir up symptoms. Already weak, already got your share of disorders, and now here comes something else. Reliving the traumatic event as if it were happening again, flashbacks. Upsetting dreams or nightmares about the traumatic event. Severe emotional distress or physical reactions to something that reminds you of the traumatic event. So what would be the simple solution? If you know that there is something systematically going on to invoke trauma in you, to not watch it, to not be a part of it, to turn the TV off, to focus on what God wants you to focus on. The enemy wants to draw you in, saints as well as sinners. And if you look at something long enough, it's going to desensitize you to the point where you don't have any feeling for it. But you're like a zombie though. And then if you're like a zombie, you're not going to get anything done. There's parts of your brain that's not going to think about how can we come up with a solution. Instead, what you're going to say is, that's not my business. I'm good. I'm fine. Zombie mode you are in. I know for some individuals, it gets rough. It gets rough to talk about these things because you know that every situation in your life that was traumatic, if you didn't get the necessary help, never bothered to deal with those things, it shows up when you're talking to people. You're cussing and fussing over the littlest of things. It shows up when you're spending money that you shouldn't be spending. It shows up when you want to be intimate, but you can't because of what showed up in a movie. You have been triggered in some kind of way. Symptoms of avoidance may include trying to avoid thinking or talking about the traumatic event. See, If I'm avoiding it, I'm not dealing with it. If I'm not talking about it, if I'm not trying to help others get out of it, I'm just running from it. We don't want to trigger emotions within us by continuing to watch, somebody being abused and so on and so forth. But what we can do is we can talk about things and provide the necessary resources to help ourselves as well as others. That's healthy. It's not healthy to keep looking, for instance, in the example of someone watching their mother being murdered by the murderer. How is that helping? Celebrating the anniversary of the mother's death using video that captured the mother's death. What? You see, giving examples, but you got people who are torturers, right? They're the type of individuals that they'll do that sort of thing. And it's not about healing or helping. It's about bringing up these emotions, these symptoms, these things within you to cause you to eventually no longer be that threat. The enemy has this down to a science, and he uses the same old tactics. And some of you all who know Satan, he uses the same old tactics over and over and over again. Why? Because they work. They work. If I'm going through a process of healing, then I'm not going to avoid the places or the activities or the people initially, because I've got to deal with my fears, my worries, my stress head on. But I'm not going to stay there though. And no healthy, functioning psychologist, doctor, what have you, is going to tell you, oh yes, stay right there in the abusive situation. But a sick one will. One who hasn't gotten over their traumas and dramas will say, well, what have you been doing? The reason why there's abuse in the household. What have you been saying? You see, a person who's dysfunctional puts out troubling statements and tells you to do troubling things because their programming tells them to say these things and do these things. The mother who has been abused tells her daughter, it's not that bad. At least you're not going through what I went through. Yours is emotional. Mine, it was physical. Physical is much worse. And she goes, what? Emotional, a healthy functioning person would say, what? Emotional and physical abuse is both bad, and I need to get out of this. Okay. Well, what did God say? What? You heard me. What did God say? My body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. God would not have me to stay with anyone. But he said he hates divorce. You see how they'll take the words. Now that's spiritual abuse. They'll take the words of the God that you serve and cause you to stay in that space, that traumatic space, that space that's keeping you in bondage. The enemy will use, I'm telling you, Lord Jesus, he will use somebody who's closest to you to reinforce all of the programming, the negative programming. And so, once again, you won't be doing anything more than you've already done, especially if you're a threat to the establishments. Negative changes in thinking and mood. Symptoms of negative changes in thinking and mood may include negative thoughts about yourself, other people, or the world, hopelessness about the future. We get people who come through here with these symptoms. Memory problems, including not remembering important aspects of the traumatic event, difficulty maintaining close relationships, feeling detached from family and friends, lack of interest in activities you once enjoyed, difficulty experiencing positive emotions, feeling emotionally numb. We are experiencing these things as a nation. Some of them, maybe one or two, or for some people, all of them. Some people have been feeling these sorts of things ever since childhood and never got the help. So that's why there's the drugs and the alcohol and the sexual experiences there, because they're self-medicating. And that is not functional or healthy. Why do you do what you do? Why is it that you feel detached from family and friends? Why is it that at times, you feel emotionally numb? Why is it that you don't respond in the way that would be healthy? Because there were those things that were never dealt with for some of you all. And so you're blaming people around you for why you do what you do or think the way you think. And that isn't true. It is ourselves. It's how we reacted or responded to what we went through time and time again with different people. And where that issue is, or issues, is what needs to be dealt with. And you can't do it by running from it. You can't do it by pretending as if you're fine when you know you're not. Blaming and shaming and denying, that doesn't cut it. But I see it. I know I have to deal with it. And so how I deal with it is I do the total opposite. The enemy wants to get me in a state of mind where I'm not thinking wisely, that I'm not sharing the type of information that is going to shame him, shame the devil. You just stay in your box. You just do this or you just do that. You see, that is what some of the churches were doing. They weren't trying to free people, deliver people. You went into a church, you came in, and you left the same way. Why was that? Because once you're free from these things that bind you, once again, as I said earlier, you become a threat. So there's the changes in physical and emotional reactions. When trauma takes place, we become easily startled or frightened, always being on guard for danger, self-destructive behavior, such as that drinking too much or driving too fast, trouble sleeping, trouble concentrating, irritability, angry outbursts or aggressive behavior, overwhelming guilt or shame. Children who are 6 years and younger, they reenact the traumatic event or aspects of the traumatic event through play. Frightening dreams that may or may not include aspects of the traumatic event. When I took my children to a funeral when they were young, I didn't think nothing of it. It was an outdoor event. People were smiling, laughing, and so forth. But one of them decided to venture off over to the casket while it was still open and saw my aunt. Didn't freak out, didn't cry or nothing like that. While we were talking, ventured back over there when the men were lowering the body into the ground. We didn't think nothing of it. The kids, they were, asking questions. We answered questions. And then one day I was looking out the window, and in the backyard, they had dug a hole. And they took their toy and they put the toy in the hole, and then they covered it up. And after they had said a few words and was singing and doing whatever, they were good for reenacting things that they saw. It was disturbing. And I never took them to another funeral after that. Matter of fact, I stayed away from the funerals too. You see, it's something difficult, something strange, that rises up when somebody passes away, and not everybody handles it in the same way, especially young children. For those of you all, when this time comes where, trauma and drama is happening all over again and hitting you every which way, there are those resources. There's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK. Those individuals who are veterans, there's a veteran crisis line. You call the same number, 1-800-273-TALK, and you press 1. If you are dealing with some things and you're already accustomed to speaking with mental health professionals and so forth, because you've done that in the past, and you know that your thoughts are getting darker and darker by the minute, reach out, make that appointment to see a doctor or mental health professional. I know for some of you all, you talked about monies and so forth and how much they cost. There are free ones based on income. Okay. You have to put in free resources, free mental health resources. That is not typically advertised, but based on income, you may even qualify where you don't pay anything. Okay. So that is the first message of this series of how the enemy is using these personality disorders, traumas, dramas, you name it, to keep people under thumb. How these things are induced. We're going to get into the second audio where we're going to delve deep into how narcissism is being used to keep people in a box as well via traumatic events. I thank you. As always, please do look for that audio, and blessings to you. Please do check the description box for anything that might be of interest. You've been listening to YouTube and I'm Enterprise 7. Feel free to like, subscribe, comment. We do welcome giving on this channel, and thank you.